'Twas just a garden in the rain, close to a little leafy lane, a touch of colour 'neath skies of grey.
Welcome everybody to the April session of Reading Pilgrimage 2026. This month we're going to be focusing on volume 3 or chapter volume 3 of Pilgrimage, which is let me just do my share here. And our special guests are two folks who have been Pilgrimage fans since 2022 and carried on their own. So Karin Horowitz in the UK and Phyllis Orrick in California have continued to work through this challenging text, and they have some reflections that they'd like to share, which I think is terrific. And I will put out an invitation. We're open to anybody who wants to come forward from the group and offer some thoughts and reflection. You don't have to do a whole presentation. It can just be 5 minutes of ideas. It's all welcome because, this is a text that we only gain from seeing many different perspectives on. So this is book 3, Honeycomb. First published in the UK in 1917, in the US in 1918. And you can see that the Duckworth started to put the collective critical acclaim for Pilgrimage on the cover, and this was a period when dust jackets were really quite a new thing for the most part. So it's extraordinary to see that somebody still has a dust jacket copy. And if you happen to have like 5,000 pounds, you're welcome to go try to get a copy of it. In terms of timeline, there is an interesting thing goes on here. So now we're, of course, further away. We're 28 years sort of after the fact, or 22 years after the fact. But Dorothy Richardson sort of compresses a number of events in this book. In particular, she compresses the fact that her two sisters, her eldest sister and her youngest sister, were not married together. It wasn't a double marriage. They were just a couple of months apart, April and June. She compresses it into one event that happens, and then the time frame for her mother's suicide at the end is kind of brought forward. It happens much faster than it happened in real life. In the opening, she's going to her new job at Newlands, which is to the east and west, the west and north of London. But her family now, her father is bankrupt. Miriam's father is bankrupt, and she's living in Ealing, in the home of her future brother-in-law, Bennett Brodie. And this is, in fact, what happened to the Richardsons. They live with John Batchelor, who married her elder sister, Frances Kate. So Newland's a very, this is a higher level of living than she's ever had exposure to. These are wealthy people, relatively wealthy. I mean, they're not landed gentry or anything like that, but they have servants. They have a big house. It's a beautiful house. And of course, they have a beautiful garden, which is a special thing for Miriam. This is sort of based on Richardson's own experience. She briefly worked for the family of a man named Horace Avery. That should be an O. That's a typo on my part. And Horace Avery later became not a QC like Mr. Corey in the book, but a King's Counsel, and was knighted. But there are some parallels between Horace Avery's experience and what we see in the book. In particular, there's a reference to Jabez Balfour, and this was somebody who actually Horace Avery helped prosecute for his fraudulent scheme when he was brought back to the UK, and that happened. Interestingly, these both happened. I mean, the news that Jabez Balfour was being brought back came to the papers on April 30th, 1895, the same day, the day before, rather, there had been the part of the trial of Oscar Wilde and Alfred Taylor on an indictment charging certain misdemeanors. We now know, of course, that this is related to the back and forth between Wilde and the Marquis of Queensberry, who was Alfred Douglas's father, and the libel suit where essentially Queensberry accused Wilde of being a homosexual. And this ended up going very badly, of course, for Wilde. And this is why, the one reference we really get from Mrs. Corey is, well, it's in the Bible, which, of course, only leads Miriam to wonder even more what was going on. And it, of course, never occurs to Miriam, although, of course, by the time Richardson is writing this, she knows what's gone on. But Miriam doesn't. So there is actually a reference to the marriage on April 16th, 1895, that John Arthur Batchelor, who is Bennett Brodie in the book, married Frances Kate Richardson, who was the oldest daughter of Charles and Mary Richardson. And then finally, right at the end of the book, in the last chapter, we're with Miriam and her mother in on the seaside at Hastings, and this, in fact, is in the paper. There is an article on the Reading Pilgrimage website that refers in more detail to the newspaper accounts about the suicide of Dorothy Richardson's mother, Mary. So with that, let me just stop here, and I will turn this over to Karin and Phyllis, and it's in your hands.
Great. Thank you very much, Brad. And we both like to start by saying thank you for inviting us to give a little bit of an input into our experiences and what we've been reflecting on and noticing. I think we both found it really helpful to have this as a focus to draw some thoughts together, because it can all be quite diffuse and not connected. So thank you. I have got a PowerPoint for both of our reflections, so I'm just going to share that.
Okay.
Okay. That should be up now, and I'm just going to enlarge it.
Yeah, if you go to slideshow mode,
yeah,
another window. You got it. There you go. Perfect.
Yeah, no, yeah. This is how I normally share it. So great. So yes, we're focusing on Honeycomb, but we will probably jump around a little bit in terms of linking our thoughts with other parts of pilgrimage. You mentioned in the email that you sent out, Brad, that we've been doing what we call a sort of slow, close reading. And we were so inspired by the previous round of these sessions that we kind of spontaneously made contact. Phyllis and I didn't know each other before the pilgrimage event, the first set of readings. And we've actually never met in the flesh. So we've done this fully virtually, which has been fantastic. And the process we kind of created is reading about 100 pages individually on our own every 6 weeks. So obviously a lot slower than this round. And in fact, we're on revolving lights now, so we haven't made it the whole way through. And what we wanted to do was just look at the prose in more depth, because there is so much to absorb, obviously in terms of content and the sort of historical context that you're so good at putting the book in for us, Brad, but also from a literary point of view, to look at the themes, the writing style, particularly the punctuation. I know Phyllis is going to say more about this, and the ellipsis, which I think links quite nicely with the email you sent out and the quotation that you've recently been given by about ellipses. Is somebody wanting to say something? I'm not sure. Okay.
No, I think that was an accident.
Okay, that's fine. So the ellipsis, I think, Phyllis and I have at times spent a lot of time on that. And it often captures the sort of internal reveries and reflections that Miriam is having, and the gaps. And the quotation in the email you sent out, Brad, I think some of the stuff in the gaps is mentioned in that quotation. Why didn't Richardson contain some of the things Miriam might have been worrying about and angsting over? I think the ellipses are a great way of acknowledging them without going into detail.
Right.
So we thought of this approach, this slow, close reading, and purely by coincidence, I came across this book last year, which some of you may have come across. So it's called Look Closer by Robert Douglas Fairhurst. And he talks quite evocatively there about what slow reading is. So I've highlighted it, a way of patiently allowing the words to do their work or reveal their possibilities for play. There's an awful lot of play actually in Richardson's prose. I'm not going to be talking about that so much, but it is there, often with the use of dialect and the sort of private language that exists between Miriam and her sisters. But Fairhurst talks about how, in fact, Nietzsche talked about the fact that in an age of work, that is of haste, of unseemly and immoderate hurry-scurry, which is so eager to get things done, what is needed is an approach that will teach us how to read well, that is slowly, profoundly, attentively, prudently, and I think that's a great description of how reading Richardson can be, what it offers to us, and certainly what Phyllis and I have been trying to do. And I think some of the things Phyllis will talk about later link quite nicely with the last statements here, that when we pick up a book, we aren't only trying to lose ourselves in it. We might also find ourselves there if we're willing to look closely enough and leave our mental doors ajar. And certainly Miriam writes about that experience regularly. So this is our approach, and all I'm going to do is mention a few themes and things that I've noticed using Honeycomb as the basis, and offer them really to others to think about. So some of the themes that have spoken to me are spring, gardens, and joy. Brad, you already mentioned gardens, and we heard about that from Dr. Annika Lindskog last time. So I'm going to make a link with that. And that links for me with the singing of Miriam's spirit, which is such an important, joyful expression of herself, and then takes us to her search for freedom, which is a strand throughout all of Pilgrimage. And indeed, her quest for her identity, being authentic, not false or masked, a word she often uses, as many others are around her. So each chapter volume in Pilgrimage is inherently hopeful, even the bleak ones, because it's another start, but it's kind of like a series of false starts. And then when we get to the end, we can reflect on where she's got to with the destination. There's therefore an importance of the chapter volume titles and the moments when the overarching title Pilgrimage appears. I just have one point to make around that. So each theme is like a path that we can trace and follow through what sometimes feels like the maze of Pilgrimage. It's so huge, you can get lost in it. Where are you going? And Pilgrimage is, to use another metaphor, a kind of tapestry of themes. So I thought I would talk just briefly with a few quotes about these themes. So Dr. Linskog mentioned this foundational memory, the Edenic garden, which is so important for Richardson. And in Honeycomb, that really comes to life. We've got so many quotations where she talks about gardens and she talks about spring. Spring is a feeling, and it's not simply a season. It's a state of being, and it's a time of coming to life. So she talks about how spring is outside the house, but then it does get into the house too. And lots of repeated language whenever spring comes up. So joy is often equated with spring. The feeling of blood, her bloodstream, the blood in your fingers, all of the senses. It's really a riot of sensory experiences. There's a lot of light in spring. The blaze of, again, childhood's garden, which is linking back to Linskog's allusion last time. The humming of the bees, so really important for Honeycomb, our title. And the remembered garden. So there's a sort of garden in all of the gardens that she's hearkening back to. Lots and lots of quotes. I haven't pulled them all out, but there are a fair few here. Same language that we see repeatedly, blazing light. Her blood leaped and sang. Spring is actually more in London in some ways than it is in the countryside, which is also interesting to reflect on Miriam's emerging relationship with London, certainly parts of London, and how she's able to find spring even in a city. So that really reinforces the fact it's a state of being. It's, as she puts it here, an essence, something you feel in the right surroundings, whatever those may be. There's an interesting toing and froing of the seasons in spring. So we have May happening before April. It's going back and forwards. And again, Phyllis is going to say a bit more about that. And I think that also shows that spring isn't necessarily rooted in our sort of sense of sequential time, but it is this state of being, and it flares up at different times. I was actually, I'll just say this quickly, I was really reminded of T.S. Eliot's Burnt Norton and the childhood garden there. And I checked on the dates and everything. Obviously, he wrote it nearly 30 years later. But there's a sense in which maybe he is picking up on Richardson's spring. I don't know if there's been any research on that, but I was interested in that. And then the last quotes here, again, words like blazing, the sight of the spring flowing from her eyes, mixed with her breath, the soft beating from head to foot of her blood, and it's there anywhere out to the limits of space. So this unlimited burgeoning spring, which I think is such a powerful part of Honeycomb. So Honeycomb itself, I really feel chapter 6, which is a really poetic chapter, it feels like Honeycomb, and that's in the middle of London, Regent Street, central London. She's using words like golden, streaming, the paving stone. She repeats the idea of streaming, life streamed up from the clouds, to walk along the radiant pavement of sunlit Regent Street forever. It's interesting to look at the structure of each chapter volume and the number of subchapters within it. Chapter 6 kind of being at the center of the book. So that just comes out to me as a sort of centerpiece, almost like the center of the flower, really. Jumping ahead here, another thing I just wanted to draw our attention to is the use of the word pilgrimage in Honeycomb, where she's observing the game of billiards, and we see the billiard ball rolling around the table. Again, the word joy. It was pure joy to Miriam to wander around the table after her ball, sheltered in the gloom, through an endless grand chain of undifferentiated figures that passed and repassed without awkwardness of the need for forced exchange, held together and separated by the ceremony of the game. And I think that combination of being held together, but also separated, being able to have maybe one's own identity in a group is so important as part of what Miriam's seeking throughout pilgrimage. Coming on to freedom as a theme, there are often images that link nicely with freedom when it comes up. And here in Honeycomb, we have the grate, the old breakfast room grate at home, and the schoolroom bars at Banbury Park. There's always a grate. Here she is again teaching the children, and there's a grate. The grate has these bars, and the house, the room, the lifestyle is a prison. They would grow up and be exactly like their parents. It was a kind of prison. She can't even offer them the education she offered to the girls at the school because she knows that it would actually open up possibilities that would make them potentially more miserable in their prison. However, the smell of the leather and the cigars, very Proustian, gives her a sense of a sort of deep freedom to hold back and keep free and real. It's impossible to be real unless you were quite free. So this takes us to her search for her identity, her ongoing search for that. I'm not going to say a lot more about that because I think otherwise we'll end up taking up the whole session. But I just wanted to offer, yeah, this is the problem with talking about pilgrimage. I find that it just expands endlessly. It gets into your psyche. And I had a really interesting experience a couple of weeks ago, so I'll just share that quickly. So I went to this concert, which it was in Cambridge. I live quite close to Cambridge. So it was a piece called Four Places of the Soul by the composer Jeremy Thurlow, who I don't know, but he is the head of music at Robinson College, Cambridge. So I'm actually there, believe it or not. There I am circled up there in the balcony area, just in case you want to test the fact. Well, was I there? Yes, that's me. Now, this was really interesting because he introduced the piece and he said the four places of the soul are the individual on their own in a contented state, the individual on their own in a discontented state, the individual in company in a discontented state, not feeling relations or working well, and the individual in company in a contented, harmonious state. And surely this is pilgrimage. So here are some of his program notes, and some of the language I just feel is a nice gloss on pilgrimage. So I won't read it all out, but for example, section 2, the second movement of his piece, he talks about voices awry. Our individual, Miriam, finds herself drawn into a crowd. So she's always being drawn to groups, whether it's a group of intellectuals when she goes to lectures, or whether it's a group of writers, whoever it may be. It's hectic, volatile, sometimes euphoric, sometimes destructive. Sometimes there's no room to be herself. She's always pushing back. She wants to find that space to be her. She's betwixt. She can be a bit hopeful, though hesitant. She does sometimes lose a bit of purpose and direction. She recovers it. A place where, as in movement 4 here, we dwell in each other. We haven't really got there in our reading process together yet, but we will get somewhere where we find elements of this, where there is community, where there is some welcoming, some affirmation. It's not coercive. There is space for our soloist and anyone to join in or to be a little apart. It's essentially a dance, free and easy and joyful. So those words again, free and joy, that I've been talking about. So it was just, for me, a really nice coincidence that I went to this 2 weeks ago, and I thought, well, let's share it and offer it to you. So that is as far as I'm going to go. I'm going to hand it over to Phyllis. So Phyllis, I've got your slides to follow. So shall I move to the first slide?
Absolutely. And again, apologies. Karin and I are slow readers and long thinkers. We'll try to keep it short, but I'm going from a lot of...
This is wonderful. Let me just jump in and say, Karin, that wonderful observation. So I think everybody,
Thanks, Brad.
appreciates that. and look forward to what we hear from Phyllis.
Yeah. Well, I'm very interested in the whole idea of consciousness and her portrayal of her and Miriam's consciousness. Originally, I was going to say, well, I'm using Richardson's last name, so I'm going to use Henderson. And I said, no, I can't do this. It's Richardson and Miriam. I'm just leaving that there. I'm not quite sure why. But so I've got 3 sections that kind of work together, but more for you just to spark thoughts and find things of your own. Breaking the conventions of space and time, learning to read Richardson, or reading to learn Richardson, and the power of silence, ellipses and unspoken words. So next slide, please. We can read, this is the May-April discontinuity that Karin referred to earlier, and you can just see what happens. We see that its time does behave unconventionally throughout Pilgrimage, and this drastic break over a course of 12.5 pages, we see on chapter 5, it's April, chapter 8, it's May, and 6 pages later, the action is back in April. And that's just kind of setting the tone for some of the ways Miriam is testing our habits of consciousness and showing what her aspirations are. And again, we get into the double thing that Professor Linskog mentioned also last month of we know that Darth Richardson knows more than Miriam does. And once in a while, you see that kind of leak out. Yes, next slide, please. Again, here we have the longer passage immediately following the earlier one. And look at what time is. It's a hill she's been climbing. The weeks are green lanes of experience. The present she holds in her hand, and it lifts her to the tips of her toes. Time is an airy flood in which she swims. Finally, as for space, the landscape is visible from 2 horizons, encompassing past and future, forward and back. Next slide, please. So not just time is required to be experienced in a different way to achieve the level of consciousness that Miriam and Richardson aspire to. Space must be experienced in a different way as well. I love this passage. In this passage, she's walking down a dusty road, one of dozens of invocations of the pilgrim image that we've been talking about, when a dog lands in front of her. After the dog leaves, it is the landscape that is moving by Miriam, not the other way around. And you'll see this often in the city too, when she's on the bus or when she's walking, or the golden Honeycomb passage of the central London. And the images from the faraway horizon come forward to her. What is behind Miriam moves in front of her, and what is in front of her moves behind. And again, you'll see this happening all the time. She loves horizons, landscapes, perspectives. Next slide, please. I just love this great loop of time. It's literally traveling in a circle of time where present, past, and future exist in a continuous loop along which movement is possible in either direction. This opens the paragraph that follows the scene where Mr. Corey fails to catch on to what Miriam is trying to talk about, or what she's also talking about in her head that he can't hear. Next slide, please. So this is one I don't want to get too far into. This might lead to Karin and me doing another reading project, but we won't get into that right now. Richardson name checks numerous writers as Miriam plows her way through a vast array of books, novels, treatises, scientific texts, popular and highbrow, contemporary and canonical, sectarian and religious. That strange book that Miriam is reading and that evokes in her such strong feelings is A Human Document by Malik. And I went and looked it up. I'm just that kind of a go down the rabbit hole person. Interestingly, he sabotaged his daring approach by cloaking it in conventions that would appeal to the Mrs. Coreys of the world. And he is now relegated to obscurity because of the very trappings that delighted the mass audience: tragedy, drama, character, and disgusted Richardson. Richardson and Miriam feel strongly the book should be able to be read in any order and should not be read for the story. That's what we were talking about earlier, what Karin was referring to as well. And whether that was how her novel was read was beyond her control. First, because it was published one chapter volume at a time. And second, because readers would turn the pages howsoever they chose to. but how Richardson wrote them makes it possible for her to achieve the same effect. This is a bit of an exaggeration. I would like to say that almost any line or passage in the chapter novels could be read as an expression of the entire book, or at least an element that we're going to see throughout the book. Okay, next slide, please. So let's see, I think I just read those notes. Oh yes, that's right, I'm writing about both of those. I think this is also pretty much what I just said. I just kind of conflated. But I do like the idea that the very last book, in a book, the author was there in every word. And that's, again, what I'm getting back to with Richardson's achievement, is that every word is going to be her. And I'm not going to, you must do that. You must find the author, and the author must express themselves. And I think, can it scroll up a little bit more? I'm not sure. Maybe okay, that's good. Let's go to the next slide. Do we have the power of silence? Oh, there we go. Yeah. So this is, Karin mentioned this, but she and I, we'll literally just flip through a page of our section, and when one of us has marked something, we stop. And I'd say 4 times out of 5, it's the same place. And all of a sudden we said, wow, look at these ellipses. That's a 3 ellipse. That's a 4 ellipse. And we just started, it was just a way to sort of, she's drawing you in with punctuation, which she wrote a marvelous essay about, which I highly recommend. And it's also a sign that Miriam and Richardson are growing more intense. What I like about this one is it's the ellipsis is so clearly not just an empty pause, which is how I took them when I first read a lot of it. You know, you do that all the time, just blah, 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 you know, go on. Or when you're editing something, you throw in an ellipsis. But no, it's literally full of unspoken words that we can try to imagine. So in this instance, Miriam's thoughts rush in afterward, ending with this: you know, I know nothing, and that I know nobody knows anything. Comfort me, ... And we have 3 more dots to fill in with words as best we can. This would be, she also employs lengthy unspoken conversations that Miriam imagines with other people. And this would be an example of silence being experienced by the characters, though as readers, it is quite a noisy proposition. This passage is also interesting because of what Dr. Linskog called the doubleness. I just referred to that earlier, though, in the text, how we as readers see more than Miriam knows. So this 3rd time around, I felt that I could say to myself, well, Miriam, you know, you're 20. Maybe they're quite not as bad as you think they are, you know? Because I am going through my journals from my 20s. I'm going, oh man, she has some ideas here, you know. Maybe when you're a bit older, ... And that was the first time I allowed myself, I'm realizing as I speak, to step out of the book and into what Karin was talking about. My door was open to me to understand myself through the book. And I don't mean a symbolism, and not even metaphor. It was consciousness, I suppose. I don't know. And now the last slide is really something I read Dr. Linskog's, I think there should be one more with the Linskog's final paragraph. Did I lose that one? All right. Do we have one more after this? No, darn. Okay. Let's see. Well, I will find it for you and send it to you. It is Dr. Linskog, in her discussion of Backwater last month, referred to how Richardson considered the consciousness she was seeking to experience and express to be comparable to a tree, an ocean, a fountain. Well, at the end of her article, Dorothy Richardson and the Poetics of Silence, Brad, can you pull it up quick? In the Journal of Dorothy Richardson Studies, which is a wonderful site, I think, to dip into some academic writing, but it's very accessible, most of it, and it's worth keeping in mind. Basically, she was saying that silence was so important to consciousness that perhaps, Dr. Linskog is saying, perhaps the reason her novel had to be so long was she had to put so much silence into it. So thank you for indulging me in this.
Oh gosh, no, that
anyway.
pleasure is all ours, I'm sure.
Well, anyway, and it's really great. I'm so glad to see we still have people on month 3. And again, I just can't emphasize enough. I mean, I never used to read a book twice, right? When I traveled all over as a kid, oh, go to the same city twice? What a weakling, you know. And this is the first. I started with Dickens, did the first 6 novels, read them over. And then I've started with this, and it's just really reading it again is, I'm glad you're here. And I think it's a long journey, and it's like a maze, like Karin says, but having companions and it's really a very different experience. That's all I can say. So thank you.
I agree completely. Karin, can you, oh, great. Thank you. So much to respond to, and I know others will. I just want to jump in with 2 points. Number one, I think you're getting exactly to the one of the points that to me is so amazing about Pilgrimage, which is I don't know another work of fiction that so deliberately attempts to recreate the experience of consciousness in the moment. And that's why it is constantly, a revelation to see that going on. And I just mentioned that, George Thompson in his reader's guide, which is mostly sort of like walking you, holding your hand through the book, confirms that exactly in those pages, Richardson has a flashback where at one moment she's in May, returning hats with Bennett Brodie, and then she's back in April having experiences at Newlands with the Coreys. The other thing is that I was really struck. I mean, you mentioned your 20-year-old self. Um, you know, Honeycomb, I mean, this happens throughout Pilgrimage, but really it happens a lot in Honeycomb, which are these Miriam trying out lives. So, just in that scene where she walks into the town to get some chocolates, and she thinks, "Oh, I'll go to this village, this house, and I'll work for this lady in as a maid or something." And then a moment later, she thinks about this old man who's gonna bring her into his carriage, and the two of them will live until his death in this nice, quiet house. And she'll occasionally read. I mean, she's having all these sorts of, I'm going to teach until I'll try to pay off my father's debt. Oh, but I'll never be able to pay off my father's debt. She's just trying these things on to see, does this fit for me? Does this fit for me? So I mean, I love all of these observations, and I just want to open it up for the rest of the group. I'm sure you found something in all of that. Oh, Phyllis?
Well, I found the paragraph. If
Okay.
Uh, Yet silence in Richardson's text also represents the unknowable, those aspects of existence that move beyond language and that even when grasped and briefly held by Miriam seem to remain hidden from the reader. Silence then hides parts of Pilgrimage from us unless we too can see beyond words to the hidden side of things and converse with the text in the way suggested by both Miriam and Richardson. If real speech can only come from silence, as Miriam says in Revolving Lights, perhaps the reason Richardson needed to write such a very long novel was because she had so much silence to put between the lines. And I'll send you that slide because I'd like to have that in at the package. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll put it when I send out the link to the YouTube. I'll include that quote because it is a wonderful quote. And that whole article by Annika is
it's really good. Yep.
Yeah. But let me open it up. Folks, reactions, thoughts, questions about Honeycomb in particular. We have Amy.
Hi, sorry, was unmuting myself. I was thinking about the garden, that when Karin brought that up at the beginning, and then I think it was Rebecca in the chat mentioned like Jungian archetypes, and that's exactly how I think of it. But then I was also thinking about that Joni Mitchell Woodstock song. Like, I think it starts off, I came upon a child of God who was walking along the road, which is like a pilgrimage, and then we've got to get ourselves back to the garden. So, that song just came to me. And also, I loved the parallel that you made with the concert that you actually attended. That's so incredible. That gave me chills.
Thank you. Thank you for to Rebecca for the link with the Jungian archetype of the child. As it happens, coincidentally, synchronistically, I've been doing a lot of work with Jungian archetypes recently, and alchemy as well. So I really appreciate that reference and the Burnt Norton link. Thanks. And thank you, Amy.
I will jump a couple of things. Number one, on the garden, let's remember just fundamentally in Christianity, we have the Garden of Eden as such a profound, going to a time of innocence, and whether or not Richardson intended to make that kind of connection is doubtful. The second thing I want to mention, because I'm sure somebody might jump on this, is Malick's The Human Document was, I believe, in the 60s, transformed by a British artist named Tom Phillips into something called the Humament, where he cut it up, he illustrated it, etc. And the funny thing is, I learned about that book. I saw that book in a used bookstore in Denver many years ago, and I thought, this is so strange. I didn't know what it was. I should have bought it right then and there because now they're worth a fortune, the original editions of them.
I got it from Cal. I don't own it.
Okay.
I've had it out for 2 years now. 90-day renewal. And he had more than one edition. He never stopped making it.
Oh, wow. I did not know
he
that.
kept, and each edition took like 10 or 15 years. It's that's another one. Let's make a list. Actually, the two together would be a very interesting thing, because he takes existing words, but then redacts everything.
Right.
So
right.
your and then illustrates it. I'm still trying to get my head around it. I'm so glad you actually saw one though. But yes, and if anybody needs some really obscure book and wants me to Xerox some pages, I have a Cal library card. And my first time through, I was reading first editions of most of the chapter novels, which was hard because the pagination was totally off and the punctuation was different. But anyway, I'm so glad you brought that up, Brad. Thank you.
Other comments or questions about the Honeycomb or the discussion so far today? How about hats, buying hats?
Something I was really struck by, actually, just as we went into the session tonight, is how neither Phyllis nor I really referenced the last section in Hastings and the time with her mother. And I was conscious, that it's such a powerful strand of the whole experience. And I missed a lot of it the first time through.
Absolutely.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think most readers kind of wonder, what is this blurry thing? And now the book is over.
Yeah.
And when you know what happens, suddenly you see, I mean, she takes her mother to the homeopath who just
Yeah.
feeds her a bunch of nonsense and then takes her outside and says, your mother is in a terrible condition and she needs immediate serious care. And Miriam says, well, we don't have any money for that. And I'm sure anybody who's in the mental health profession, like my wife and my daughter, that's such a sadly recurring theme, which is I need help and I can't afford it.
Yeah.
And honestly, I did not know what had happened the first time through. I really did not know. But then the second time or third, whatever it is, I knew it right away. It was really, and I hadn't done any research. I steered away from the reader's guides because I want to approach it through my own lens. And so But thanks, Karin, for reminding me. It's something we might want to talk about again some other time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and there is
I have to go back and look at the article I wrote about the reporting on the suicide, because I did find an article I don't think I'd seen before about the inquest that mentions Dorothy Richardson's own testimony about what her mother, and in that scene where her mother's up, in the wee hours of the morning, restlessly moving around. And you can see that, earlier in the book, there are several moments where you can see Miriam is with her mother, and she's sort of like, oh my God, she's going to have a panic attack or whatever it is, an attack of severe despair. And she's sort of like, I don't know what to do with it, and I hope it doesn't happen. Um,
Mm.
and also the fact that her father clearly sort of just dismissed anything that was going on with her mother.
Well, and then when Miriam was having that sort of fight with her father, and she, almost let him win, but she said no, but it's going to be so upsetting to her mother to watch her father be proven incorrect or incompetent.
Right.
So she's really caught between both of them.
Her mother is actually a more fully formed character I've appreciated the second time through. The first time, I don't know, I must have just switched off in those sequences. It's really interesting rereading Pilgrimage to notice what you notice the first time round and what you completely didn't notice, and what that tells you also about yourself when we think about finding ourselves in the process. So yeah, that's one of the
Yeah,
things.
well, I mean, I would say most readers the first time through find it will probably not even notice her father, except for the in Pointed Roofs when he's accompanying her to Germany. And then even the mother is just this, specter who passes through in little glancing references. And if you know that context, obviously, I'm sure there are people who read Pilgrimage multiple times and don't, who haven't bothered to find out Richardson's own life experience and understand that context of the suicide. And it will come back later on. I don't remember which book in particular, but there is a scene where she passes a tea
Oh, yes, right.
shop in London that evokes memories for her of her mother, and and in fact I think it's the shortest chapter in the entire
Yes.
the whole of Pilgrimage. It's literally like 200 words long.
Yes.
And it's all related to that memory,
Mm.
which is another interesting example of Richardson dealing with memories
Yeah.
through avoidance in some ways.
Or transformation as well, transforming them into something that gives them a life and significance beyond the experience. I mean, the whole book in a way is that, I think.
Yeah. Well, that in particular, because it comes back twice. First, where she has this sense of dread when she encounters it, and there's that brief chapter, and then I think later on in chapter volume 11, she happens to be walking through London and passes it again and says, consciously says, this doesn't have the horrible connection that it had years ago when I first encountered it. And so that idea of processing memories multiple times to see, what they are and to help them lose their power. I'm sure that's a therapeutical. I mean, that's a key aspect of
Well, again, it takes us to Jung, memories, dreams, and reflections. So yeah.
Well, and in a way, it also enables her to escape them and become herself and not be bound by them, and to get the freedom to be herself that you talk about.
That's right, to be free from her past, to have a different relationship with the past.
Right.
Yeah.
I wonder, does anyone know, did Richardson actually ever read any Jung? I mean, she was certainly aware of Freud, who was on everybody's lips in the 20s.
I don't know. I know she read Nietzsche. I didn't manage to find the quote, but there's something in one of her works about Nietzsche. I was hoping to find it. I just didn't have a chance to in advance of this because of the quote I had from him at the beginning. But I don't know about Jung.
Right.
I don't know if Rebecca does. She's giving us an amazing
I know.
list of references in the chat, which is fantastic.
That will be reproduced. I hope we can get the chat when we get the thing.
Yeah.
Perhaps a Richardson Studies journal might be worth a search through too, just to see if Jung pops up there. I'm not sure.
Well, probably my first place would be to look in her the Windows on Modernism collection of letters, because she writes a lot about what she's reading.
Yeah.
And you kind of get an insight. One of the reasons she probably didn't write more on pilgrimage is she was such a prolific letter writer, at least of the ones that are preserved. And I think at the end of this year or early next, the Oxford edition will be publishing an edition of her letters, which is even more complete than Windows on Modernism. Lots of stuff has been dug up through kind of hardcore research recently.
Here's something just her firsthand. This is a letter to Breyer in 1948. And she's saying, also, for the first time, and without the nonstop practical preoccupations that accompanied its composition, I read Pilgrimage, finding it strangely interesting, written by someone else. I mean, you also, in her letters, she is a bit of a jokester, or just, I mean, she takes on different personas depending on who she's writing to, as we all do. But
Right.
it's fun to sort of watch things change. She may be playful with some people and trying out ideas or seeing if they'll take the bait and rise to it.
Right. I before we break up, I did want to mention one thing which I should have put in my presentation, but let me just share this. So there is the first volume of a professional audiobook recording of Pilgrimage. It just came out from Naxos, which is like the best company when it comes to classic audiobooks. And Lucy Scott is a wonderful reader. So I snatched this up already. I've only listened to Honeycomb, and I don't know when the other volumes are coming, but this is an amazing development. So it is wonderful to hear Richardson's words read by a professional performer, and I would encourage you, even if you've finished the first 3 volumes, it's worth a revisit. This is available on Audible if you're an Audible subscriber, but you can also obtain it direct from Naxos, or you have to see I don't think your libraries are likely to have it yet, but if you're patient, they'll probably bring it into their collection one of these days. So, Amy?
Yeah, that just made me laugh because I remember that while I was reading this book, my husband would like walk in and out of the room and he'd be like, why are you whispering it? Like I find myself without even knowing that I'm actually reading it aloud a little bit quietly. And I don't know if it's just because I feel like I'm in my own head or something like, and I don't even know I'm doing it, but several times throughout the course of the month, he's started laughing at me and he's like, "You're doing it again. You're reading out loud." And I was like, "Oh, okay, sorry." But it's almost like because when you showed that audiobook, I was like, "Oh, I wonder if it would be difficult to read this out loud or to hear it out loud because it is such a mind in your mind kind of experience." But I guess the fact that I was reading it a little bit quietly and vocalizing it, maybe it does lend itself to that.
I think it does. I think I will say numerous times in sort of the tough middle volumes. Like Revolving Lights is one of them, and The Trap is, I think, the boggiest of the batch. I found myself reading aloud to sort of like keep myself focused.
I agree, especially the dialogues, the sort of intellectual discourse when she gets into that.
Exactly.
My tendency is to just skim over that really quickly. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And then you're skimming, and then all of a sudden you wait, no, this part's good. Go back, go back. How far back do I go? That's where
Yeah,
ellipses come in
exactly.
handy too, because when you see those, there's something good going on. But I'm not recommending skimming it. But yeah, yeah. But
No, I mean, many novelists did terrible jobs of writing intellectual dialogue, and I'm not sure Richardson can be pointed to as a master. But you do have to pay attention because she'll slip stuff in because that's the way she is. Lindsay?
Sorry, unmuting Mike. Part of the reason why I raised my hand is I thought I'd show you the blue sky here in Eastern Oregon. It's no, approaching noon. I just thought I'd comment a little bit stream of consciousness as a newbie. I told you, Brad, that it was a complete fluke that I discovered this on your blog, reading another article and found out about this. I'd never heard of the book before, and it's just so astonishing how real Miriam is, and
Hmm.
then how densely she's exploring consciousness and doing it in a different way. It's kind of knocking my socks off. And then there's kind of this embarrassing bit that sometimes I feel, oh my goodness, I am Miriam. I was Miriam when she's in social situations, and you realize, oh my God, she's making such a huge mistake. And it's just astonishing to me how kind of experimental, but it doesn't feel experimental because you just feel Miriam so much and who she is. It's just an amazing accomplishment. One quick question I had is that a couple of times Miriam is writing Mrs. Corey in an accent. And I wanted to, I'm kind of imagining Ian Carmichael as Lord Peter Wimsey. I don't know what kind of accent that's called. Is that in Oxford of a certain, social class? But am I right that that's sort of that kind of accent? Throwing in the, ain't it sort of where here, ain't it is very much a sort of Southern slang kind of thing. But I remember whimsy, he'd put the ain't it on the end of it, and it's a different kind of, it's a more elevated kind of construction, sort of. So I was just curious about what accent do you imagine Mrs. Corey has, or that Richardson is trying to portray.
Right. I have to confess ignorance on this. Maybe somebody like Leslie has a clue about where Mrs. Corey comes from. I will say Lucy Scott reads her a bit Cockney, which I thought was not going down the right path, but I could be wrong. Um,
You want
can,
why
yeah,
don't
can we?
why don't you take Leslie first? Can I how
Yeah,
do I
that's
get
thank
rid
you,
of
Mikey.
sure. How do I just lower hand there?
Yeah.
This is an interesting one. I think a certain kind of upper class or upper middle class accent, somewhat affected. I'm I'm not sure that I'd go as far as saying Woodhouse is your go-to on this. I think that would be a bit too over the top. But yeah, I mean she's obviously several class ranks higher than Miriam. I mean, there is certainly a class thing going on there. Um, I mean, the kids have ponies, don't they?
Hmm.
It's that kind of ambience. She's
Ponies and
living in the
a
country.
groom to ride along with them.
Yeah, and they're living in the country. And I also get the sense that I get the sense in several of these episodes of Pilgrimage that Miriam is on the margins of another novel altogether. And this feels, and the Corys feel like possibly there is a whole other novel going on there with their friends from South Africa who sound well dodgy. They've probably got some kind of dodgy business proposition going, but that is absolutely nothing to Miriam. She would not know what's going on there, but you just feel there is something going on in another sphere, as it were. But how one would quite position these, it's not quite Evelyn Waugh, it's not quite Nancy Mitford, but it's getting on in that direction, I think, class-wise.
Mikey?
And
Go
I
back
just
to you.
wanted to say that I looked up the Naxos audio recording and it seems to be available right here, like not having to buy it or order it. I was listening.
Yeah, you probably can listen to a sample.
It has every chapter with the amount of time.
Yeah, it probably is not giving you. You probably have to subscribe to listen to it. Give it a listen to see whether or not you want to, because you'll.
There you go. Okay,
yeah.
but there's quite a bit of it available. So, that's the first thing I wanted to point out. But the other thing, this is sort of off track, and I may have missed something along the way. But has anyone produced anything about the material culture of Richardson? I mean, she talks so specifically about fabrics and clothing, and it's the thing in a way that's the most clear.
Yeah.
And yet we're so far away from that time period that we don't necessarily know what it feels like or looks like or anything.
I know
Anyway.
in the last reading group that one of the speakers did speak about that quite a bit. I can't remember who.
Rebecca,
Okay.
I believe if you go to the Journal of the Richardson Society,
That there's
there
something.
is an article that Rebecca Bowler wrote about clothing and fabric.
Okay, I will look for
I
that.
could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that was like in our second conversation back in 2022.
Yeah.
We talked about clothing because
Or blouses.
Richardson talks so much, and she makes us aware of the fact that somebody like Miriam just has a handful of things that she can wear, that she has to wear day in and day out, week in, week out. And the luxury that somebody like Mrs. Corey has to actually have, closets full of choices and different things to wear at different times. That's one of the little passing things here in Honeycomb that we see Miriam sort of like, oh, well, uh, in fact, I guess she's given a dress to wear to sort of like bring her up to the standards of the Coreys.
And then she gets a dress at the wedding for the wedding,
Right.
which I assume is a part of the wedding. But
right.
Another thing, Virginia Woolf, the waves, all of the garden puts me in mind of that, and I know that Virginia Woolf read at least some of Richardson.
Yes, she did. Yeah, she read, and in fact, she sort of shied from making comments about it, sort of switching between denigrating Richardson and sort of saying, I don't want to be overly influenced by Richardson's work.
Well, if you remember, I mean, with the children in the garden, when the garden is so huge and overwhelming and the children are below the leaves, it was bringing it back to me just in terms of the psychological meaning of the garden.
Yeah,
anyway,
absolutely.
That's it.
No, thank you for that. Okay, we're past the hour. Any last comments about Honeycomb? If not, let me just mention, of course, as a reminder, the pilgrimage website. I'm not mailing out. When we did this in 2022, I sent out kind of more frequent emails. I'm kind of confining it to the notices about this, an introductory one, and then the reviews. I hope that's okay with everybody because all the rest of the material is there on the website. Of course, we still have the Reddit, which hasn't been tremendously active. And then next month, we'll be getting together on the 4th of May, and this will be an interesting session. This is the novelist Amy Sheeran, who had written about it on Medium, and I snatched one of her quotes and put it as a blurb on the back of one of the volumes and reached out to her, and I said, would you like to come talk to us? And she was delighted to do that. So that'll be interesting. And she admits herself she hasn't actually read all the way through it, but she found it a pretty profound reading experience. So it'll be great to have Amy joining us. So with that, let me just say thank you. A special thanks to Karin and Phyllis. I really have to say, number one, wonderful thoughts and reflections and enriching the experience. But number two, to everybody else in the group, if you feel the least bit inclined to kind of take a few minutes to share some of your thoughts and your reflections or a passage that you'd like to discuss, please bring it forward. It is such a wonderful way of building our own community and sharing this remarkable book. So please, if you have any interest in that, drop me an email or even just speak up in the next session that we have and let us know you're interested. With that, thank you again, and we will see everybody in May. Take care.